my stroke length right now, but I'll just try and add a few long ones right now. Textual says in his book that for thinking about theoretical matters, an excellent time to think about theoretical matters for a telescope and how the polishing works and designs of telescopes and all that. It's really a good time to think about these things when you're actually polishing, as long as you don't let your conclusions dictate to you the actual method of polishing, because that's already been pretty firmly established as what works and as to what works and what doesn't. So I figured that the best thing I can do for myself is to polish just the way the book says, and then think about all the theoretical things as I go along. I'm using slightly longer strokes now for a while, as you can see. These are probably pretty close to 1/3 strokes I'm using now. I'm just going to check the videotape just for a second here, and just see that the tape is running through the machine. I can hear the motor running, but that doesn't mean the tape is going. Yep, the tape is running. That's good. The red light is on, which means that theoretically it should be taping, but this is a pretty old VCR, or a pretty old video camera. It's about 6 or 7 years old or something, and it wasn't exactly the best one that I could afford. Like, it wasn't really a great one when I bought it. It was just inexpensive, but for my purposes it seems to work very well. So this is probably going to be kind of boring to anybody that's not interested in telescope making when they see this final video, but I thought of so many little subtle points that I wanted to get across as I'm working around here that I think it's a good idea to just keep the tape running. I put a fresh 2-hour tape in and just tape all my thoughts as I'm working, and give you a pretty good idea what's involved in the actual polishing, the stroke length, what you do. You can see that I'm not thinking entirely about what I'm doing while I'm talking. You know, like, you know what I mean? Like, but on the other hand, it's not not exactly rocket science what I'm doing. It's not that difficult what I'm doing right now. You notice that my position, the way my body worked, changed a little bit then, because there's so much junk in my basement I couldn't get my right foot back to the farthest position on the floor in that one particular spot. So I polished in a slightly different stance on the floor at that one point. So, but that doesn't matter too much, I don't think, just as long as I keep the thing moving. Right now this is actually not that severe a job. It seems to be functioning really well. I'm not just sure why, but I probably just added just the right combination of water and barnsite to the tool surface before I started. It's not tending to waltz around or jerk much or twist or anything like that on me right now. It's just a nice smooth motion, which is very nice. As you can see, I'm using approximately, like I say before, 1 double stroke per second. You don't have to do it real fast. But on the other hand, if you do it too slow, you're not, using your time and energy very efficiently. There just seems to be a natural rhythm to the polishing at the speed I'm using now. It just seems to be a natural rhythm to do it. Just a natural sort of a feeling to it when I do it the way I'm doing it right at the moment. Using longer strokes now, or trying to. But right now the tool is letting me have any length of stroke I want, and use any amount of W overhang either way I want. It's not hindering me or binding me. It just feels beautiful right now. I'm really surprised. Since this may be my last polishing operation before I start figuring the mirror, it's nice to have it close out with such smooth, dependable motion, because that's more likely to remove any zonal defects in the mirror if you have a nice smooth feel to the polishing. Textual says you sort of develop a feeling for the work you're doing, sort of a rapport with it. So, like I say, that's one reason why I didn't want to play my rock music while I did the polishing. I have done that in the past, though, with polishing various mirrors, but this time I don't think I'll really need to. Now, the figuring, even though I might polish for 2 or 3 hours today, when you're actually figuring a mirror, the typical figuring action, when you're first parabolizing, might last 10 or 15 minutes. And that's a fairly long period of time to do any figuring on the mirror. By figuring, I mean special polishing action to try and modify the surface to end up with the correct paraboloid. You're not trying to necessarily get rid of pits when you figure a mirror. You're just trying to modify the actual shape of the mirror surface to the shape that you want to end up with. And the only way you can do that, of course, is by removing the high zones on the surface of the mirror. You cannot add glass to it. You have to find where the high areas are and take glass off, like selective polishing in certain areas on the mirror where they're high. The trick is, really one of the hardest tricks is to find the high spots. It's not quite as easy as it sounds. It is actually easy if you know how to do it, but you have to interpret the knife edge readings in the Foucault test. It's really very simple. It's starting to get working okay, but it's starting to stiffen up a little bit now. That's because I think the tool surface is starting to dry out a bit. Yep, it's getting good and stiff now. All of a sudden it just seems to go stiff. I'll just polish one more time here. I want to show you how I add the new, yeah, it's hardly moving now. So what I'm doing is just decentering it. Just look at how much I'm decentering it here. That's a little too far. About that much is what I usually do. Just enough to expose maybe 1.5 or 2 rows of pitch squares. And quickly I add more polishing agent and water. I try not to dilly-dally while I'm doing this. Just a little bit on each square. I try not to reach down. I'm doing it a little carelessly. I don't reach down in between the squares to do it. I just dab it on the surface, because down in between the squares, I didn't take the tool off when I trimmed it. I just brushed it out by hand with my fingers. The little chips of pitch that came off, there's all kinds of pitch chips in between those squares. I don't want those popping up onto the optical surface, for fear they might add like little grains of abrasive and start scratching the thing. So I'm having a lot of trouble shifting this back right now. I hope I haven't gotten myself into trouble. Nope, I'm all right. So I just dab the surface very carefully of each of these squares with usually the corner of the brush. And today I was a little bit careless when I was talking to you there, because I think I let the brush dip down in between, but that's all right. As long as it doesn't scratch the surface, I don't care. It's worse to have a little scratch at this stage when it's almost polished than it is at the beginning, because then the scratch will polish out when you're polishing out the pits. Now this is going to be real stiff at first. Okay, now just rotate it a bit. I start out usually just with a few short strokes to start out, just to get the sort of the new layer of water and polishing agent kind of spread out over all the squares. It'll naturally spread out from the edge all through the center of the thing, all over the center square. So you just have to put it on the edge like I showed you. See, it's stiff, and it's not only stiff, but it's very jerky, and it won't let me move the thing very far yet. So I'm just sort of breaking it in right now. I'm glad I was able to have the tape run long enough to show you that stage of what I do. Now it's starting to work back into where it feels more normal again. It's coming along really well. As you probably surmised from watching me, I haven't been real precise about stroke length or adhering to any type of rules exactly, and that's actually good for the law of averages. It's like you don't have to be, the less formal you are about it, the better in a way, just as long as you don't have real long strokes and stuff like that. You also want to maintain, if you're using the pressure on it, you don't want to put extra pressure on the thing at the end of a stroke or something. You have to maintain uniform pressure throughout the stroke length back and forth, which is actually not hard to do. You just sort of do it naturally as you're working. And if you put extra stroke length, extra pressure at the back of the stroke or something, you're liable to have the edge of the tool dig into the mirror and create a low zone or something like that. And it's still not just broken in just right. It's still sort of getting a little bit funny about how it moves. So I'll use a few short strokes for a while to give it a break from the longer ones. You see, these are quite short, these strokes here. Now I'll gradually break into maybe a few longer ones. I have to, you notice I'm looking around to see where my back foot goes, because there's all kinds of junk around here that I cleared out. I tried to clear out an area big enough to work in. And I have to actually think about where my back foot goes before I start polishing. By the way, there's still abrasive particles, some of them quite large, like number 60 abrasive and larger, on the floor of the right where my feet are. So you don't want to reach down and scratch your foot or touch the floor or something like that, or you're liable to end up with a nice large abrasive particle in your hand, which might drop in between the mirror and the polishing surface and create a really massive scratch in no time at all, which will probably not want to bother removing, because it would be an enormous task to remove a scratch at this stage, especially a large one. So, by the way, if you do end up with a scratch in your mirror, the trick is to rotate the mirror in its cell in the telescope, the final telescope position, so that the longitudinal, like the direction of the scratch, is parallel to the direction of one of your spider blades. And if that happens, the scratch, any diffraction spike caused by the scratch will just merge with the diffraction spike in the star image caused by the spider blade, and you won't even notice the scratch there. But if you have several scratches at slight angles to each other, you can't really do that. So you end up with a few diffraction spikes sticking out. Little pits and grayness don't do that because they're round. What they effectively do is make your diagonal a little bit larger, like the diagonal shadow a little bit larger in effect, and they tend to diffract a little bit of light out of the diffraction disk of the star. But as to how large an actual effect that would be in actual practice, it's probably really not all that severe. By the way, I should mention to you that somebody I know has a fairly large telescope with quite a bit of it's a commercial telescope with quite a bit of astigmatism in the images, like I was mentioning before. And at low power it works fine, but at high power it's not a pretty sight. 3-inch refractor he was using as a photographic guide telescope gave a vastly better image of the planets. I think it was Jupiter or Saturn we were looking at. It gave a vastly better image of Jupiter than his large telescope mirror, which is almost as large as mine that I'm doing here. So if you can avoid astigmatism, that's good. You also have to have a very accurate diagonal mirror if you've got a Newtonian reflector to avoid astigmatism, because a little bit of curvature in your diagonal can cause a lot of astigmatism in the final image as well. I may make a Gregorian or a Cassegrain focus for this telescope to get the image down near the ground where it's easier to look through, the more convenient eyepiece position to use. I'm not just sure exactly what I'm going to do. It depends on the final figure of the mirror. I find that there's 2 areas of the mirrors I've done so far that have been really difficult to figure accurately. Well, the number 1 region that's hard to do is the edge. An area right near the edge of the mirror usually is very difficult to remove a high spot there and get it blended in evenly with the rest of the mirror. And the same thing with the center of the mirror. For some reason I nearly always have trouble with the central third of my mirror. It's usually really a pain to get the thing accurate. So with this mirror, if I get the outer zones accurate and still have, say, the center 6 or 8 inches of the mirror in a really bad situation where I can't get an accurate figure on it, all I have to do is make some kind of optical design, like with a large folding optical flat or a Cassegrain secondary or a Gregorian secondary, and then that'll just block the starlight from hitting the optical surface of the mirror at all. And so the accurately figured outer zones of the mirror will do their thing, and I don't have to worry about figuring the central area of the mirror at all. If I can't get it easily, I'm not going to worry about it. And that way, like, say that I get in an extreme case, I might use an 8-inch optical flat to block out, and maybe there'll be a turned edge, a quarter of an inch wide, which will reduce the aperture to, say, around 19.5 inches. And then this is getting stiff again. I think I'm going to have to add some more water before long. Let's say that the actual aperture is 19.5 inches if I mask off a turned edge. And then there's a center area 8 inches wide in the mirror that I can't figure accurately. Well, all I have to, the focal ratio is f7, which is it's about 135 inches. So as far as I could tell, I haven't actually measured it with the Foucault test yet, but that's roughly what it is. From measuring the curve in rough grinding with that depth method with the drill bits and the straight edge, all I have to do is polish an 8-inch optical flat or a large Cassegrain secondary to fold the light path down to where the eyepiece is